Clara Whitmore's bare feet slammed against the muddy ground as lightning split the sky above her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't stop. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, Silas was coming. Blood ran down her arms where she'd clawed through the cellar door. Rain mixed with tears on her bruised face. She had nothing. No shoes, no money, no hope. Just run. Keep running, or die trying. If you want to know how one woman's desperate escape led her to the man who would change everything, subscribe to my channel and stay until the end. Comment below what city are you watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Virginia. Summer of 1818. The thunder came first. Clara Whitmore pressed her palms against the dirt walls of the root cellar, feeling the ground shake above her. Water seeped through the cracks in the wooden door, pooling around her bare ankles. She'd been down here for 2 days now. No food. A single cup of water Silas had thrown at her like she was a stray dog. "Think about Judge Blackwell's offer," he'd said through the door. "When you're ready to behave like a grateful sister, you can come out." The water rose to her knees. Clara's hands found the door again. She pushed. Nothing. She slammed her shoulder against it. Pain shot through her already bruised body, but the wood groaned. Again. Again. The lock gave way on the 5th hit, and Clara tumbled out into chaos. Rain hammered down so hard she couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Lightning turned the sky white, then black, then white again. The wind nearly knocked her sideways. She didn't care. Clara ran. Her nightgown, the only thing Silas had left her, was soaked through in seconds. Her feet found every rock, every thorn, every sharp edge hidden in the mud. But she kept moving. Because behind her was a man who'd beaten her for 2 years. A man who'd stolen her mother's money. A man who'd sold her to a widower whose 2 wives had died under mysterious circumstances. Ahead was the unknown. She'd take her chances with the unknown. Nathaniel Ashford hadn't slept in 3 days. The storm had taken down 2 sections of fencing, scattered his cattle across the valley, and flooded the lower fields. He'd sent his men home an hour ago, even Daniel, who'd insisted on staying. "Go," Nathaniel had said. "I'll check the creek one more time." Now he guided his horse along the swollen waterway, watching for any animals that might have gotten trapped. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a gray dawn, an air so thick it felt like breathing through wet cloth. His horse stopped suddenly. "Easy," Nathaniel patted the mare's neck. "What is it?" Then he saw her. A woman lay face down at the edge of the creek, half in the water, half on the muddy bank. Her dark hair spread around her like seaweed. She wore nothing but a torn nightgown that barely covered her. For a terrible moment, Nathaniel thought she was dead. He was off his horse before he'd made the conscious decision to move. His boots splashed through the shallow water as he reached her, his hands finding her shoulder, turning her over. She was breathing, barely. But that wasn't what made Nathaniel's jaw clench. Her face was a mess of bruises, purple and yellow, and fresh red where the skin had split. Her arms bore marks that looked like fingers had gripped too hard too often. Her feet were torn to shreds, bleeding freely. Someone had done this to her. Someone had hurt her badly, and she'd run from them so desperately that she'd chosen a thunderstorm over staying. "Miss," his voice came out rough. "Miss, can you hear me?" No response. Nathaniel stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her. When he lifted her, she weighed almost nothing, like the fear had hollowed her out from the inside. "Hold on," he said, though she couldn't hear him. "Just hold on." Chad. Mrs. Abigail Crane had been the housekeeper at Ashford Hall for 32 years. She'd seen plenty in that time. But the sight of Nathaniel Ashford carrying an unconscious, beaten woman through the front door at dawn made her drop her coffee cup. "Lord have mercy." She was already moving. "What happened?" "Found her by the creek." Nathaniel's voice was clipped, controlled, but Mrs. Crane knew him well enough to hear the rage underneath. Someone beat her, badly. Send for Dr. Hayes. The blue guest room. Now Mrs. Crane. She sent young Thomas running for the doctor while she led Nathaniel upstairs. The woman hadn't stirred, hadn't made a sound. Only the shallow rise of her chest proved she was still alive. They laid her on the bed as gently as possible. Mrs. Crane's practiced hands began to work removing the soaked coat, assessing the damage. "These bruises are days old," she said quietly. "Some of them weeks. And these here." She pointed to marks on the woman's wrists. "Someone tied her up. More than once." Nathaniel stood by the window, his hands clenched at his sides. "Who is she?" "No idea. No ring, no identification. Just—" Mrs. Crane paused, her fingers finding something at the woman's throat. This. A locket on a tarnished chain. Mrs. Crane opened it carefully. "There's a crest inside. Looks like— could be the Whitmore family. They've got land about 30 miles east." Nathaniel turned. "Whitmore?" "Yes, sir. The father died a couple years back. Left everything to his stepson, Silas Whitmore. There was talk about a daughter-stepdaughter, but nobody's seen her in ages." The woman on the bed stirred. Her head moved restlessly, her cracked lips parting. Won't marry him." Nathaniel moved to her side. "Miss, you're safe now." But she was lost in fever, trapped in some nightmare she couldn't escape. "Silas lied. He lied about everything. Mother's money." "Silas." Nathaniel looked at Mrs. Crane. "The stepbrother." Mrs. Crane's face hardened. "Mighty strange that nobody's seen this girl in 2 years, and now she turns up beaten half to death and raving about her brother's lies. Keep someone with her at all times. I want to know the moment she wakes up. And where will you be?" Nathaniel was already at the door. "Sending for my lawyer." Clara woke to sunlight and softness. For a long, disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was white plaster with gold trim. The bed beneath her was soft, impossibly soft, and she wasn't wet anymore, wasn't cold, wasn't drowning. Then memory crashed back, and she tried to sit up so fast that pain screamed through her ribs. "Easy now." A woman's voice, calm and firm. "You're safe, child. Lie back." Clara's eyes found the speaker, an older woman with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a housekeeper's dress, and her hands pressing gently on Clara's shoulders were warm and careful. "Where am I?" Clara's voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat raw. "How did I—" "Ashford Hall. Mr. Ashford found you by the creek 3 days ago. Dr. Hayes has been tending to your injuries. You gave us quite a scare." 3 days. Clara had lost 3 days. "Has anyone come looking for me?" The fear rose so fast she could taste it. A man, tall, blonde hair, would have been asking about, "Nobody's come, miss. You're safe here." Clara wanted to believe that. She'd forgotten what safe felt like. "Can you tell me your name?" the woman asked gently. Clara hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, to reveal nothing that could lead Silas here. But these people had saved her life. They deserved at least the truth of who she was. "Clara," she said finally. "Clara Whitmore." Recognition flickered in the woman's eyes. "I thought as much. The locket you wear, it's got your family crest." Clara's hand flew to her throat, relief flooding through her when she felt the familiar weight. Her mother's locket. The only thing she had left of her. "I'm Mrs. Crane, the housekeeper here. Mr. Ashford will want to know you're awake. He's been checking on you every few hours." "Mr. Ashford?" "The man who found you. Owns this estate and about 10,000 acres besides. Good man." Mrs. Crane's voice softened. "You can trust him, Miss Whitmore. I've known him since he was a boy. He's not the kind to hurt people." Clara had heard that before. About her father. About Silas in those early days when he still pretended to be a caring brother. But she'd also learned to read people to recognize the difference between performance and truth. And something in Mrs. Crane's steady gaze told her this wasn't performance. "Can I see him?" Nathaniel Ashford wasn't what Clara expected. She'd imagined someone like Silas' smooth, polished, all-surface charm hiding something rotten underneath. Instead, the man who entered her room 15 minutes later was tall and quiet, with dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that seemed to see everything while revealing nothing. He stopped several feet from her bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "Miss Whitmore, I'm glad to see you awake." "Mr. Ashford." Clara tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the pull in her ribs. "Mrs. Crane tells me you saved my life." "I found you. Dr. Hayes saved your life." His voice was deep controlled. "Though he tells me it was a close thing. Another hour in that water, and we'd be having a very different conversation." "Then I owe you both my thanks." Nathaniel shook his head slightly. "You owe me nothing. But I would like to understand how you came to be in that creek wearing nothing but a torn nightgown covered in bruises." The directness surprised her. No careful circling, no polite pretense, just the question plain and simple. Clara's hands twisted in the bed covers. She'd spent 2 years hiding the truth, minimizing the damage, pretending everything was fine. But she was so tired of pretending. "My stepbrother," she said, and the words felt like releasing a breath she'd been holding for years. "Silas Whitmore. After our father died, things changed. I became less a sister and more a servant. And when I displeased him..." She didn't finish. The bruises on her face finished for her. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "The marks on your wrists." "He liked to lock me in the root cellar, to teach me obedience," he said. Clara heard the flatness in her own voice, the disconnect that had become her survival mechanism. 3 nights ago, he told me he'd arranged a marriage for me. Judge Horace Blackwell. I was to be delivered to him within the week. Something flickered in Nathaniel's eyes. "Blackwell. You know him?" "I know of him. 2 dead wives. Rumors that won't quite die." His voice dropped, gaining an edge. "Silas sold you to him. For $5,000. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Apparently, that's my going rate." "And the night of the storm. He locked me in the cellar again. Said I needed time to come to terms with my future. Then the rain started, and the water started coming in, and I..." Clara closed her eyes, remembering the terror, the desperate scramble the moment the lock finally gave way. "I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew that dying in that storm was better than what waited for me if I stayed." Silence filled the room. When Clara opened her eyes, Nathaniel hadn't moved, but something had changed in his expression. The careful neutrality had cracked, revealing fury so controlled it was almost more frightening than if he'd shouted. "Silas Whitmore will answer for what he's done." Clara shook her head tiredly. "He won't. He's respected in the county. Well-connected. Who would believe me over him?" "I would." Nathaniel's voice was quiet but certain. "Dr. Hayes would. Mrs. Crane would. And any judge who saw the evidence of what was done to you." "Blackwell is a judge. He has friends. Influence. And I have more." Nathaniel took a step closer, then seemed to catch himself stopping at a proper distance. "Miss Whitmore, I am not a man who makes promises lightly, so understand that when I tell you this, you are under my protection now. Silas cannot reach you here. Blackwell cannot claim you. And whoever raised their hand against you will face consequences." Clara stared at him, searching for the lie, the hidden agenda, the catch. She'd learned the hard way that men didn't offer protection without expecting something in return. "Why?" she asked. "You don't know me. I'm nothing to you." "You're a woman who was beaten and nearly killed." Nathaniel's gray eyes held hers without wavering. "You ran through a storm in your nightgown rather than accept the future that was forced on you. That makes you someone who deserves justice. Beyond that, no other reason is required." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Rest now. We'll talk more when you're stronger. Mrs. Crane will bring you broth. Mr. Ashford, he stopped. Thank you, Clara said. The words felt inadequate, too small for what he'd done, what he was offering. I know I've said it already, but you don't need to thank me, Miss Whitmore. Something almost like warmth touched his voice. Just focus on healing. After he left, Clara lay back against the pillows, her mind racing. She was in a stranger's house, dependent on a stranger's mercy. Everything she'd ever known was gone: her home, her security, the illusion of family. But for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel afraid, and that she realized was something worth holding on to. 3 days later, Clara took her first steps outside her room. Her ribs still ached. Her feet were still bandaged, and the bruise on her face had faded from purple to a sickly yellow-green. But she was alive. She was healing, and she was desperately tired of lying in bed. Mrs. Crane had brought her a simple dress, belonged to Mr. Ashford's late wife. God rest her, but she'd have wanted it used, and helped her down the stairs to the morning room where breakfast waited. Nathaniel rose when she entered, pulling out a chair for her. Miss Whitmore, you look stronger. I feel stronger. Clara settled into the chair, trying not to wince at the movement. Though I confess, I'm not sure what to do with myself. I'm not accustomed to being idle. There's time enough for that conversation. Nathaniel returned to his seat. For now, eat. Dr. Hayes will have my head if you don't regain some weight. They ate in relative silence, Clara too hungry to be polite, Nathaniel apparently comfortable without constant conversation. It was strange, she thought, how easy it was to be quiet with him. With Silas, silence had always been dangerous, a prelude to anger. But Nathaniel's silence felt like peace. I received a letter from my lawyer this morning, he said, finally setting down his coffee cup. Regarding your mother's inheritance. Clara's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. My mother's? The trust she established for you before her death. Silas claimed it had been used to pay your father's debts. My lawyer found that to be untrue. The room seemed to tilt. What do you mean? The trust is intact. It's been sitting in a bank in Richmond for years, accruing interest. You're entitled to the full amount, just over $3,000. $3,000. More money than Clara had ever imagined possessing. But Silas showed me documents, letters from the bank saying, forged. Nathaniel's voice hardened. All of them. Your stepbrother has been stealing from you since your father's death, Miss Whitmore, and now we have proof. Clara set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. $3,000. Enough to live independently. Enough to never need anyone's protection again. Enough to be free. What do I do? She asked. How do I claim it? My lawyer is handling the legal matters, but recovering the money will require confronting Silas directly. He'll have to acknowledge the fraud. Nathaniel paused. I wanted to ensure you were prepared for what that might mean. Clara thought of her stepbrother, his cold eyes, his quick fists, the way he smiled while he hurt her. I'm prepared, she said quietly. Whatever it takes. Good. Nathaniel's expression softened slightly. There is one other matter. Mrs. Crane mentioned that Silas has been making inquiries in the county, looking for a young woman matching your description. Fear rose in Clara's throat, cold and familiar. Does he know I'm here? Not yet, but he's getting closer. Nathaniel leaned forward, his gray eyes intent. Miss Whitmore, I want you to understand something. This house is protected. My men are loyal. Silas cannot remove you from here against your will, and he cannot harm you while you remain within these walls. Do you understand? Clara nodded slowly. But for how long? I can't stay here forever. I have no money, no position. You have your inheritance. Once it's recovered, you'll have options. Nathaniel hesitated, then added, and until then, you are welcome at Ashford Hall for as long as you need. Why are you doing this? The question burst out before Clara could stop it. Truly, I'm not naive, Mr. Ashford. Men don't help women like me without wanting something in return. For a long moment, Nathaniel didn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than before. 4 years ago, my wife died. Childbirth. She and the baby both. He looked away toward the window. I couldn't save her. I couldn't protect her. I've spent every day since then trying to atone for that failure. Clara's breath caught. I'm sorry. I didn't know. You couldn't have. He turned back to her, and she saw the old grief in his eyes still raw after all this time. When I found you in that creek, I saw someone who needed help. Someone I could actually save. Maybe that's selfish of me. Maybe I'm just trying to fix something that can't be fixed. But the fact remains, you needed protection, and I can provide it. That's all. Clara studied his face, looking for deception. She found none. Then I accept, she said softly. And I'll try to be worthy of it. Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression. Something that might have been the beginning of warmth. You already are, Miss Whitmore. You already are. Outside, the summer sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning mist. And somewhere 30 miles to the east, Silas Whitmore was asking questions, following trails getting closer. But Clara didn't know that yet. For now, in this moment, she was safe. And that would have to be enough. 2 weeks passed at Ashford Hall, and Clara Whitmore learned what it meant to breathe without fear. Not that the fear disappeared entirely. It lurked in corners, surfaced in nightmares, made her flinch at sudden sounds. But during the daylight hours, surrounded by people who expected nothing from her except her own recovery, Clara began to remember who she'd been before Silas had broken her down piece by piece. Mrs. Crane noticed first. You're walking straighter? The housekeeper observed one morning, watching Clara descend the stairs without gripping the railing. Holding your head up. Good to see. I feel human again. Clara touched her face where the last of the bruises had finally faded. It's strange. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Healing does that. Body first, then the rest follows. Mrs. Crane handed her a cup of tea. Mr. Ashford asked if you might join him in the library after breakfast. Something about organizing the books. Clara's eyebrows rose. He wants my help. His late wife used to manage the collection. Since she passed, it's fallen into chaos. He mentioned you had experience with your father's library. She had mentioned that in one of their quiet breakfasts together. Clara was surprised Nathaniel had remembered. She found him standing amid towers of books that seemed to have no organizational system whatsoever. Volumes lay stacked on tables, shoved into shelves at random angles, piled on the floor. The chaos was almost impressive. Miss Whitmore. Nathaniel turned, and Clara caught something in his expression that might have been embarrassment. As you can see, I've let things deteriorate. That's one word for it. Clara stepped carefully around a stack of agricultural journals. Another word might be catastrophe. A sound escaped him, short, surprised. It took Clara a moment to realize he'd laughed. The sound transformed his face, softening the hard lines, making him look younger. Fair enough. He gestured helplessly at the mess. Anna tried for years to impose order. After she died, I couldn't bring myself to touch any of it. Now I can't find anything when I need it. Clara moved to the nearest shelf, running her fingers along the spines. You've got philosophy mixed with animal husbandry, and what appears to be a French novel shelved with legal documents. I told you. Catastrophe. I can help. The words came out before Clara could second-guess them. If you'd like. I spent years organizing my father's collection. It gave me something to do when... She trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. When Silas made her a prisoner in her own home. When the only escape available was losing herself in books. Nathaniel seemed to understand. I would appreciate that, Miss Whitmore, more than you know. So Clara began her work. It started as simple distraction, something to fill the empty hours, to keep her mind from circling back to fear and rage and grief. But it became something else. The library became her sanctuary, a place where she could rebuild herself one cataloged volume at a time. Nathaniel visited often. At first, his excuses were practical, retrieving a specific text asking her opinion on where to shelve a new acquisition. But gradually, the visits lengthened. He would lean against the doorframe while she worked, asking questions about her system, listening with genuine interest as she explained the logic behind her choices. "You're different here," he said one afternoon, watching her perch on a ladder to reach the highest shelf. Clara looked down at him. "Different how?" "Lighter. More yourself, I think." He paused. "Not that I knew you before, but I imagine this is closer to who you were." "Before Silas, you mean?" "Yes." Clara descended the ladder carefully, a leather-bound volume in her hands. "I was 17 when my father remarried. Silas was 23, already a man. He seemed kind at first. Charming. My father trusted him completely." "What changed?" "Father died." Clara set the book on the sorting table, her fingers lingering on its worn cover. "The will left everything to Silas as the son. I was supposed to have my mother's inheritance, but Silas claimed it had been spent. I had no way to dispute him, no one to help me. And the abuse started small. A slap when I spoke out of turn, a shove when I moved too slowly. Then he discovered I was afraid of small spaces." Clara's voice flattened the way it always did when she discussed the worst of it. The root cellar became his favorite punishment. Nathaniel's hands had curled into fists at his sides. "If I had known—" "You couldn't have." Clara looked up at him. "No one knew. Silas was careful. He only struck where clothes would cover the marks. To the outside world, he was the devoted brother caring for his fragile stepsister." "You're not fragile." "No." Clara allowed herself a small smile. "I'm not. It took me 2 years to remember that, but I'm not." The moment stretched between them, weighted with things neither quite knew how to say. Then footsteps in the hallway broke the spell, and Mrs. Crane appeared to announce that a visitor had arrived. "Mrs. Eleanor Prescott," the housekeeper said. "She's asking to see Miss Whitmore." Clara blinked. "Me, I don't know any—" "Eleanor is married to Thomas Prescott," Nathaniel explained. "They're our nearest neighbors, good people. I may have mentioned your situation to them." "You told them about me." "Only that you're a guest recovering from an ordeal, nothing more." He moved toward the door. "Eleanor has a talent for making people feel welcome. I think you might like her." Clara wasn't sure about that. She'd learned to distrust other women almost as much as men. Silas's wife, Harriet, had been complicit in much of Clara's suffering, turning a blind eye when it suited her and actively participating when it didn't. But Eleanor Prescott proved to be nothing like Harriet. She swept into the morning room with the energy of a summer storm, all warm brown eyes and genuine smile. "Miss Whitmore, I've been dying to meet you." Nathaniel has been positively mysterious about his guest, which naturally made me terribly curious. "Mrs. Prescott." Clara rose, uncertain how to handle such directness. "It's kind of you to call." "Eleanor, please. Mrs. Prescott is my mother-in-law and she's a terror." Eleanor settled onto the settee and patted the space beside her. "Sit. Tell me everything. Or don't I have no wish to pry where I'm not wanted? But I thought you might like some female company. Mrs. Crane is wonderful, but she's not exactly the sort for gossip and girlish chatter." Despite herself, Clara smiled. "I'm not sure I am either." "No." "Well, then we'll find other things to discuss. Books, perhaps. Nathaniel mentioned you've been organizing his library. That's quite an undertaking." "It keeps me busy." "And keeps you close to Nathaniel, I notice." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with something knowing. "He's been different since you arrived, you know. More present. Less like a man going through the motions of living." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't." Eleanor laughed. "I'm teasing, my dear, mostly. But I've known Nathaniel for 12 years, since before he married Emmeline. The man you're seeing now is not the man he's been these past 4 years. The name caught Clara's attention. Emmeline. That was his wife. Yes. Eleanor's expression softened with remembered grief. She was my friend, actually. We grew up together, came out the same season. When she and Nathaniel wed, I was overjoyed. He was exactly what she needed, steady, reliable, devoted. What happened? Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Do you really want to know? I think I need to. Clara wasn't sure why, but she felt it mattered. Understanding Nathaniel's past might help her understand the man he'd become. If you're willing to tell me. It's not my story to tell, not really. But Nathaniel won't speak of it himself, so someone must. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. Emmeline was delicate. Not physically weak, but fragile in ways that weren't always visible. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. The doctors in Richmond wanted her to stay in the city where they could monitor her properly. But she didn't stay. No, she feared that if she left Nathaniel for months, he might realize how poorly matched they truly were. They loved each other, but they were not well-suited, if you take my meaning. She wanted to give him an heir to cement her place in his life. Eleanor's voice dropped. So she stayed here against all advice. And when her time came, something went wrong. Clara's hand had moved to her throat without her realizing it. The baby? A boy. He lived perhaps an hour. Emmeline held him as he died, and then she followed. Eleanor blinked rapidly. Nathaniel was at her bedside through all of it. He hasn't been the same since. He blames himself. Terribly, unfairly. He believes if he'd been a better husband, she would have trusted him enough to seek proper care. If he'd insisted she go to Richmond, she might have survived. Eleanor met Clara's eyes. He's spent 4 years punishing himself for her death, refusing to consider remarriage, throwing himself into his work, building walls around his heart so thick that no one could penetrate them. Until now. Eleanor smiled gently. Until now. Clara looked away, uncomfortable with the implication. I'm just a guest. A woman he rescued from unfortunate circumstances. If you say so, my dear. Eleanor rose, smoothing her skirts. I should be going. Thomas will wonder what's keeping me. But I hope we'll see each other again. I have a feeling we could be great friends, you and I. I'd like that. After Eleanor left, Clara sat alone in the morning room thinking about what she'd learned. Nathaniel's reserve made more sense now. The careful distance he maintained, the way he seemed to pull back just when they were getting close, he was protecting himself. Protecting them both, perhaps. But knowing why didn't make it hurt any less. That night, the nightmares returned with a vengeance. Clara found herself back in the root cellar, water rising around her, Silas's voice echoing through the darkness. You'll learn to behave. You'll learn, or you'll drown. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't scream. The water reached her chin, her mouth, her nose. She woke gasping. Her nightgown soaked with sweat. Her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. For a long moment, she simply sat there trembling, trying to convince herself that she was safe. She was at Ashford Hall. The bed beneath her was soft and dry. Silas was 30 miles away. But the fear wouldn't release its grip. Clara lit the candle beside her bed and tried to read, but the words swam before her eyes. She tried to lie down again, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw dark water rising. Finally, desperate for something to anchor her to reality, she wrapped herself in a shawl and crept downstairs. The library was dark, except for moonlight streaming through the tall windows. Clara didn't bother lighting additional candles. She knew the layout well enough by now to navigate by feel. She found her way to the section she'd been organizing that afternoon and pulled out a volume of poetry, one of her mother's favorites. She was partway through a sonnet when she realized she wasn't alone. Miss Whitmore? Clara spun, her heart leaping into her throat, the book clutched to her chest like a shield. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his shirt untucked, his dark hair disheveled. He looked as though he hadn't been sleeping either. "I didn't mean to startle you." His voice was rough with something fatigue perhaps or concern. "I saw the light and thought perhaps one of the servants had forgotten to extinguish a lamp." "There's no lamp." Clara gestured weakly at the moonlit room. "Just me. At 3 in the morning. I couldn't sleep." She paused. "Apparently neither could you." Nathaniel moved into the room, stopping at a respectful distance. "Nightmares." Clara nodded. "About Silas. Always about Silas." She set the book down, suddenly exhausted by the pretense of normalcy. "Sometimes it's the cellar. Sometimes it's his hands around my throat. Sometimes I'm running through a storm that never ends, and he's always right behind me no matter how fast I go. Come here." The words were so quiet Clara almost didn't hear them. She looked up to find Nathaniel watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I shouldn't," she said, even as her feet carried her forward. "It wouldn't be proper." "Damn proper." His voice cracked on the word. "You're terrified, and you're alone, and you shouldn't be. Not tonight. Not ever again." Clara stopped an arm's length away from him. Close enough to see the circles under his eyes. Close enough to smell the faint hint of whiskey on his breath. Close enough to touch if she dared. "Why do you care so much?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "About me. About my suffering. You could have helped me recover and sent me on my way. Instead, you've involved yourself in my troubles, made yourself a target for my brother's resentment. Why?" Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. He didn't bother to hide. "Because you remind me that I'm still capable of caring about something. Because when I look at you, I don't just see a woman who needs help. I see someone I want to know. Someone I want to—" He stopped shaking his head. "This is neither the time nor the place." "Nathaniel." His name on her lips seemed to break something in him. His hand came up, not quite touching her face, hovering just above her cheek, as though afraid she might shatter. "I've spent 4 years convinced that I would never feel anything again," he said quietly. "I thought that part of me died with Emmeline, but then you came half-drowned and fighting for your life, and something woke up in me that I didn't know was still there." Clara's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I don't know." He lowered his hand, stepping back as though the nearness was too much. "I know only that I cannot bear to see you frightened. That when I heard you cry out in your sleep last week, it took everything in me not to break down your door. That I think about you constantly, and I have no idea what to do about it. You heard me last week. Your room is not far from mine." Something flickered across his face, guilt perhaps, or embarrassment. "I stood outside your door for half an hour, debating whether to knock. In the end, I convinced myself that intervening would only make things worse." Clara thought about all those nights she'd lain awake, believing herself utterly alone. The knowledge that Nathaniel had been there wanting to help, holding himself back out of respect for her privacy, it made her throat tight with something she couldn't name. "Next time," she said softly, "knock." His eyes found hers in the moonlight. "Clara, I mean it." She took a step closer, closing the distance he'd created. "I've spent 2 years being alone with my fears. I don't want to be alone anymore." For one endless moment, she thought he might kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips, and she saw the struggle on his face, desire warring with propriety, longing fighting against self-control. Then footsteps sounded in the hallway, and they sprang apart. Mrs. Crane appeared in the doorway, a candle in hand, her expression shifting from concern to something knowing. "I thought I heard voices. Is everything all right?" "Fine." Nathaniel's voice had returned to its careful neutrality, though Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. "Miss Whitmore couldn't sleep. I was just keeping her company." In the dark, in the middle of the night, Mrs. Crane's tone was carefully neutral. "I see. I should go back to bed." Clara reached for the book she'd abandoned. "I'm sorry to have disturbed anyone." "No disturbance, my dear." Mrs. Crane stepped aside to let her pass. "Sweet dreams." But as Clara climbed the stairs to her room, she knew sweet dreams were unlikely. Not because of nightmares, but because she would be far too busy replaying every word Nathaniel had spoken, every almost touch, every moment of that charged encounter in the moonlit library. Something had shifted between them tonight. Clara wasn't sure whether to be terrified or hopeful. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs. She dressed quickly, ignoring the pull of her not-quite-healed ribs, and made her way to the entrance hall. Nathaniel stood by the door, speaking with Daniel Cooper, the foreman she'd seen several times around the estate. Daniel was a tall man with serious eyes and a manner that commanded respect without demanding it. He also looked deeply concerned. "What's happened?" Clara asked, descending the last few steps. Both men turned. Nathaniel's expression was carefully controlled, but Clara had learned to read the tension in his jaw, the tightness around his eyes. "Daniel has news from town," he said. "Perhaps you should sit down." "I'll stand. What kind of news?" Daniel glanced at Nathaniel, who nodded. "Ma'am, there's a man been asking questions at the tavern. Been there 3 days now, buying drinks, getting folks talking. Wants to know if anyone's seen a young woman with dark hair about your age. Says she's his sister, that she wandered off during a fit of madness, and he's mighty worried." Clara's blood turned to ice. "Silas?" "Didn't give a name, ma'am, but the description he gave of you." Daniel's voice was carefully gentle. "It's close, real close." "Does he know she's here?" Nathaniel asked. "Not yet. Folks in town are loyal, they know you treat them fair, Mr. Ashford. Nobody said a word about your guest, but he's persistent, offering money for information. Sooner or later, someone's gonna talk." Clara's hands had started to tremble. She clasped them together, willing herself to stay calm. "How long?" "Hard to say. A week, maybe less, before he figures out where you are." A week. 7 days before Silas discovered her sanctuary and came to drag her back to the life she'd escaped. "He can't take me," Clara said, and was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I'm of age. I'm not his ward. He has no legal right." Legal right didn't stop him before. Nathaniel moved to stand beside her close enough that she could feel his warmth without actually touching. "But you're correct. He cannot remove you from this house against your will. I won't allow it. And when he brings the law, when he claims I'm mentally unfit, that I need to be returned to his care, then we present the evidence against him." Nathaniel's voice hardened. "The documentation of your injuries. The proof of his fraud regarding your inheritance. Let him try to claim custody of a woman he's been systematically abusing and robbing for 2 years. Clara wanted to believe it would be that simple. But she knew Silas. Knew how persuasive he could be, how easily he charmed those in positions of power. Judge Blackwell wasn't the only influential man in his pocket. "There's something else," Daniel said, his voice dropping. "Heard some talk about another man been making inquiries. Different from the first one. Older fellow, well-dressed, asking about a young woman who might have recently arrived in the area." "Blackwell." The name came out as barely more than a whisper. "Don't know for certain, ma'am. But this man he mentioned having paid good money for something he never received, said he intended to collect." The room seemed to tilt. Clara reached for the banister to steady herself, but Nathaniel's hand was there first, gripping her elbow with firm gentleness. "Breathe," he said quietly. "Look at me. Breathe." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes, to draw air into her lungs, to push down the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. "Both of them. They're both looking for me. And neither of them will find you, not here. You don't know that. You can't promise. I can." Nathaniel's grip tightened slightly. "Listen to me, Clara. I have resources they don't. Connections they can't match. More importantly, I have the truth on my side. They are criminals, one who abused and robbed his own family, another who attempted to purchase a woman like livestock. No court in Virginia will side with them once the evidence is presented. And if they don't wait for courts, if they simply come and take what they believe is theirs, then they'll have to go through me." His voice dropped, gaining an edge that made Clara's breath catch. "And Daniel, and every man on this estate who's sworn to protect what's mine." What's mine? The words hung in the air between them. Clara saw the moment Nathaniel realized what he'd said, saw the flush that crept up his neck. "Forgive me," he said, releasing her arm and stepping back. "I didn't mean to imply. I know what you meant." Clara cut him off before he could retreat further behind his walls. "And I'm grateful for it. Truly." Daniel cleared his throat. "I should get back to work. Just wanted you both to know what I heard." "Thank you, Daniel." Nathaniel's voice had returned to its careful neutrality. "Keep your ears open. If either of those men makes a move toward Ashford Land, I want to know immediately." "Yes, sir." After Daniel left, silence filled the entrance hall. Clara stood very still, trying to process everything she'd heard. Silas was close. Blackwell was closer than she'd feared. The safety she'd begun to take for granted was an illusion, a temporary respite before the storm. "I should leave." The words came out before she'd fully formed the thought. Nathaniel's head snapped toward her. "What?" "If I stay here, I put you at risk. Your estate, your people. When Silas finds out where I am, and he will find out, he won't simply ask nicely for me to return. He'll make trouble. For you, for everyone who's helped me. You think I care about trouble? I think you should." Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. "You've already done more for me than anyone else in my life. I won't repay that kindness by bringing danger to your door." Nathaniel closed the distance between them in 2 strides. "Clara, listen to me very carefully. You are not leaving this house. Not because of Silas. Not because of Blackwell. Not because of some misguided notion that your presence puts others at risk. But, no." His hands came up to grip her shoulders, gentle but firm. "I didn't pull you from that creek just to watch you walk back into the arms of men who would destroy you. You are staying here where I can protect you. Where I can—" He stopped, something vulnerable flickering across his face. "Where I can see you. Know you're safe. That's not negotiable." Clara stared at him, her heart pounding. "Nathaniel, I know this is complicated. I know we've known each other barely 2 weeks. I know there are 100 reasons why I should maintain proper distance, and 100 more why you should be wary of trusting any man after what you've been through." His grip tightened slightly. "But I need you to understand something. What I feel for you, whatever it is, whatever it's becoming, it's real. And I will not let them take you. Not now. Not ever." Clara's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "You can't make promises like that. You don't know what they're capable of." "Then let me find out. Let me stand between you and them, and we'll discover together exactly what they're capable of, and exactly what I'm willing to do to stop them." For a long moment, Clara simply stood there, held by his hands, and his gaze, and his words. She thought about the last 2 years of her life. The fear, the isolation, the complete absence of anyone willing to fight for her. And now, here was this man, this quiet, wounded, stubborn man, declaring himself her champion, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "All right," she said finally. "I'll stay. Thank you. But I want to help. With whatever comes next. I'm not going to sit in this house like a damsel waiting to be rescued. I've had enough of being helpless." Something that might have been pride flickered in Nathaniel's eyes. "I wouldn't expect anything less." He released her shoulders, and Clara felt the loss of his touch more acutely than she'd expected. They stood facing each other in the entrance hall, the morning light streaming through the windows, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between them. Then Nathaniel offered her his arm. "Breakfast." Clara took it. "Breakfast." They walked together toward the dining room, neither speaking. But Clara could feel the change in the air between them, a charge and awareness, a sense that they had crossed some invisible threshold, and there was no going back. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. She just hoped they were both strong enough to survive it. Silas Whitmore arrived at Ashford Hall on a Tuesday afternoon, 5 days after Daniel's warning. Clara was in the library when she heard the commotion-raised voices in the entrance hall, the sharp crack of boot heels on marble. Mrs. Crane's stern tone attempting to impose order. Her hands froze on the book she'd been shelving, her heart lurching into her throat. She knew that voice. Even muffled by walls and distance, she would recognize it anywhere. Her first instinct was to hide, to run up the back stairs to her room and lock the door to make herself small and invisible, the way she'd learned to do over 2 years of survival. But something stopped her. Some spark of defiance she'd thought Silas had beaten out of her long ago. Instead of running, Clara moved silently to the library door and cracked it open. "I demand to see my sister." Silas's voice carried clearly now, smooth as silk and just as dangerous. "I know she's here. The whole county knows the great Nathaniel Ashford took in a mysterious young woman a month ago. Your demands mean nothing in this house." Nathaniel's voice was ice. "You're trespassing on my property." "Trespassing, I'm here to collect what belongs to me." Clara is unwell. She suffers from delusions, violent episodes. She needs proper care that only her family can provide. The only violence Clara has suffered came from your hands. I've seen the evidence. Bruises, cracked ribs, marks from being restrained. Do you want me to describe them in detail? A pause. When Silas spoke again, his voice had changed, still smooth, but with an edge beneath it. Whatever Clara has told you, it's the product of her disturbed mind. She's always been prone to fabrication. Our father worried about it constantly before his death. Your father left her mother's inheritance in trust for her. You stole it. Another pause, longer this time. Clara pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from making a sound. I don't know what you're talking about. I have documentation from the bank in Richmond. The trust is intact. Every dollar. You forged papers claiming it had been spent. That's fraud, Mr. Whitmore, a criminal offense. This is ridiculous. But Silas's voice had lost some of its confidence. Whatever documents you think you have are authentic, verified by my lawyers, and ready to be presented to any court in Virginia. Nathaniel's tone dropped, gaining an edge that made Clara's breath catch. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a document renouncing any claim to guardianship over Clara and acknowledging her right to her inheritance. Then you're going to leave this county and never return. And if I refuse, then I present my evidence to the sheriff. You'll be arrested for fraud, assault, and attempted forced marriage. Your reputation will be destroyed. Your business connections will abandon you, and you'll spend the next several years in prison. Silence stretched so long that Clara wondered if Silas had left. Then she heard movement, footsteps, the rustle of paper. You think you've won. Silas's voice was barely above a whisper now, all pretense stripped away. You think you can just take her from me, and that's the end of it. I think Clara was never yours to take. Sign the paper. More silence. Clara held her breath. This isn't over, Ashford. It is. Sign. The scratch of pen on paper. Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief. There. Silas's voice dripped with venom. You have your signature. But know this, Clara will never be free of me. Not really. I've spent 2 years teaching her exactly what she is. That doesn't disappear just because some wealthy fool decides to play savior. Get out. She'll never trust you. Never truly love you. I made sure of that. Every time you touch her, she'll flinch. Every time you raise your voice, she'll cower. That's my gift to you both. Get out of my house, now, before I forget that I'm a gentleman. Footsteps again, sharp and angry. Clara heard the front door slam, heard the clatter of hooves as Silas's horse carried him away. Her legs gave out and she slid down the doorframe to sit on the floor, shaking. He was gone. He'd signed the papers. She was free. But his words echoed in her head, poisonous and sharp. She'll never trust you. She'll never truly love you. That's my gift to you both. Clara. She looked up to find Nathaniel standing over her, the signed document clutched in his hand. His face was pale, his jaw tight with barely controlled fury. You heard. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. I'm sorry. He crouched down to her level, his gray eyes searching her face. I'm sorry you had to hear any of that. Is it true? Clara's voice came out as barely a whisper. What he said about me, about what he's done to me. Am I broken beyond repair? No. The word came out fierce, almost angry. Nothing he said was true. You're not broken. You're not damaged goods. You're a survivor. There's a difference. But I do flinch. When people move too quickly, when voices get too loud, I can't help it. Then I'll move slowly. I'll keep my voice soft. Nathaniel reached out his hand, hovering near her face without quite touching. Clara, listen to me. Whatever Silas did to you, whatever scars he left behind, they don't define you. They're part of your story, but they're not the end of it. Clara's eyes burned. How can you be so certain? Because I've watched you these past weeks. I've seen you fight your way back from the edge of death. I've seen you organize my library, befriend my housekeeper, charm Eleanor Prescott into becoming your ally. I've seen you have nightmares and wake up screaming, and then get out of bed the next morning and keep going. His voice cracked slightly. That's not a broken woman. That's the strongest person I've ever met. The tears spilled over, then hot and fast. Clara didn't try to stop them. She'd spent 2 years refusing to cry, refusing to give Silas the satisfaction of seeing her pain. But here with Nathaniel, she didn't have to be strong. I'm so tired, she whispered. I'm so tired of being afraid. I know. His hand finally made contact, cupping her cheek with impossible gentleness. I know you are. I want to trust you. I want to believe that this is real, that I'm actually safe, that someone could actually... She stopped, unable to finish. Could actually what? Clara met his eyes. Care about me. Not because of what I can do for them. Not because of my inheritance or my connections or my body. Just me. Nathaniel's thumb brushed away a tear from her cheek. I care about you, Clara. I care about you so much it terrifies me. I swore I would never feel this way again, and then you came along and made that impossible. Nathaniel, I know it's too soon. I know you need time to heal, to figure out who you are without Silas's shadow hanging over you. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that whatever he told you, whatever lies he planted in your head, they're not true. You are worthy of love. You are capable of trust. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Clara reached up and covered his hand with hers, pressing his palm more firmly against her cheek. What if I'm never ready? What if he really did break something in me that can't be fixed? Then we figure it out together. There's no timeline, Clara. No deadline. Just us taking it one day at a time. For a long moment they stayed like that. Clara on the floor. Nathaniel crouching beside her, connected by the simple touch of his hand on her face. The afternoon light shifted around them, marking the passage of time. Neither of them noticed. Then Clara did something that surprised them both. She kissed him. It was barely a brush of lips, hesitant and quick, but the effect was immediate. Nathaniel went completely still, his breath catching audibly. When Clara pulled back, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I shouldn't have... Don't. His voice was rough. Don't apologize. But... Clara. He took her face in both hands now, tilting it up, so she had to meet his eyes. That was the single most unexpected, most wonderful thing that has happened to me in 4 years. Do not apologize for it. A laugh bubbled up in her throat, surprising her. I probably should have waited for a more romantic moment. The library floor isn't exactly. Nathaniel kissed her. Properly this time, with none of her hesitation. His mouth moved over hers with a tender intensity that made her forget where she was, who she'd been, everything except the warmth of his hands and the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the first morning you came down to breakfast," he admitted. "You were pale and thin and covered in bruises, and all I could think about was how beautiful you were. I looked terrible. You looked alive. That was enough." Clara closed her eyes, letting herself simply exist in this moment. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. The next few days passed in a haze of cautious joy and quiet intimacy. Nathaniel and Clara didn't discuss what was happening between them. Naming it felt too dangerous, too likely to break the spell. But they found excuses to be near each other constantly. Breakfast stretched into mid-morning conversations. Library organizing sessions became opportunities for stolen glances and accidental touches. Mrs. Crane noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "You're good for him," she told Clara one afternoon, catching her alone in the kitchen garden. "I haven't seen him smile this much in years." "I'm not sure I'm good for anyone right now. I'm still piecing myself back together." "And he's helping, isn't he?" Mrs. Crane's expression softened. "That's what love does, Miss Whitmore. It helps us become the people we were meant to be." Love. The word made Clara's heart clench. "It's too soon for that. We barely know each other." "Time doesn't matter as much as people think. I knew my husband for 3 weeks before we married. 52 years later, I still miss him every day." Mrs. Crane patted Clara's hand. "Don't overthink it, child. Just let yourself feel what you feel." But overthinking was exactly what Clara did best. At night, alone in her room, she cataloged all the reasons this couldn't work. Nathaniel was wealthy, respected, connected. She was a scandal waiting to happen. He deserved a wife who could give him heirs, manage his household, navigate society with grace, not a damaged woman who woke screaming from nightmares and flinched at sudden movements. And yet, when he looked at her, she forgot all of that. When he touched her hand, her cheek, her waist, she felt like the person she'd been before Silas, confident, curious, capable of joy. Maybe that was enough. Maybe love didn't need to make sense. The letter arrived 6 days after Silas's departure. Nathaniel was reading correspondence in his study when his expression suddenly changed. Clara, who had been curled in a chair nearby with a book, looked up sharply. "What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the page, and his jaw tightened with each line. "Nathaniel, what's wrong?" "Judge Horace Blackwell." He said the name like a curse. "He's written to express his concern about your whereabouts." Clara's blood turned to ice. "What does he say?" "That he's recently learned of your presence at Ashford Hall. That he has a legitimate claim on your person, having entered into a legal agreement with your guardian. That he intends to pursue all available remedies to ensure the terms of that agreement are honored." "A legal agreement?" Clara's voice shook. "He means the purchase. Silas sold me to him." "Which is not a legal agreement. It's human trafficking." Nathaniel set the letter down with controlled violence. "He can't enforce it. No court would uphold a contract for the sale of a person. You don't know that. He's a judge, Nathaniel. He has connections, influence. He could do nothing." Nathaniel rose and crossed to her, kneeling before her chair, so their eyes were level. "Listen to me. Blackwell is desperate. He paid $5,000 for something he never received, and now Silas has abandoned him. He's grasping at straws." "But what if he's not? What if he finds a way to make this legal?" "Then I'll find a way to stop him. Clara, look at me." He took her hands in his. "I didn't fight off Silas just to hand you over to someone worse. Whatever Blackwell tries, I will counter. Whatever he threatens, I will face. You are not going back to that life. Not ever." Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that his wealth and his connections and his determination would be enough. But she'd seen men like Blackwell operate before. They didn't play by the rules. They made their own rules and forced everyone else to follow them. "He's killed 2 wives," she said quietly. "Everyone knows it. No one can prove it, but everyone knows." "I know. If he gets me, I won't survive it. He'll make sure of that. He'll take his time, enjoy it, and then I'll have an unfortunate accident just like the others. He won't get you." Nathaniel's grip on her hands tightened. "I swear it, Clara. On my life, on everything I hold sacred. He will not touch you. You can't be with me every moment. You can't." "Then marry me." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's breath stopped. "What?" "Marry me." Nathaniel's voice was steady, certain. "If you're my wife, Blackwell has no claim on you whatsoever. Any agreement Silas made becomes null and void. You'll have my protection legally, publicly, permanently." Clara stared at him, her mind racing. "You can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. You're proposing marriage to protect me from a legal threat. That's not—" She pulled her hands free, standing abruptly. "That's not a reason to get married. It's one reason." Nathaniel rose as well, following her across the room. "But it's not the only reason." "What other reason could there possibly be?" "We've known each other a month, Nathaniel. A month. That's not enough time to—" "To what?" "To fall in love." He caught her arm, turning her to face him. "Because I have. I've fallen in love with you, Clara Whitmore. Completely hopelessly, probably unwisely. And I think, if you're honest with yourself, you've fallen in love with me too." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely think. "This is insane." "Probably. Everyone will think you've lost your mind. A duke marrying a penniless scandal with a criminal for a brother." "I'm not a duke. This is America, and I don't give a damn what anyone thinks." "Nathaniel." "Say yes." He stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Say yes, and I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." Clara looked into his gray eyes, seeing her own reflection there. She thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. She thought about Blackwell and Silas, and the scandal that would follow them both. And then she thought about waking up every morning in this house, with this man, knowing she was safe and loved, and exactly where she belonged. "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper. Nathaniel's face transformed with joy. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." Clara laughed, half crying. "God help us both, but yes." He kissed her then deeply and thoroughly, with none of the careful restraint he'd shown before. Clara melted into him, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt, her body pressing against his, as though trying to eliminate any space between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathaniel pressed his forehead to hers. "We'll do it quickly, this week if possible. Thomas Prescott can officiate, he's got the authority. We'll have Eleanor as witness, Mrs. Crane Daniel. Small, private, legal." "What about your family? Don't you have relatives who should be informed? A sister in Boston who'll be thrilled, and a cousin in Philadelphia who won't care either way. I'll write to them after." Clara pulled back to look at him. "You're really doing this, marrying a woman you've known a month to protect her from a murderous judge." "I'm marrying the woman I love." Nathaniel tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "The protection is just a bonus." Clara shook her head slowly, a smile tugging at her lips despite everything. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest." "Possibly both." He kissed her forehead. "But I'm also the luckiest, because you said yes." They stood there in his study, wrapped in each other's arms, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Tomorrow they would face Blackwell's threats. Tomorrow, they would deal with the practicalities of a hasty wedding and the scandal it would inevitably cause. But tonight, they had this: each other. The beginning of something neither had expected to find. Clara pressed her face against Nathaniel's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered. The first time she'd said those words to anyone since her mother's death. Nathaniel's arms tightened around her. "I love you too. More than I have words to express." Outside, the summer evening settled over Ashford Hall, peaceful and still. But somewhere to the west, Judge Horace Blackwell was reading reports from his hired men, planning his next move and calculating exactly how much force would be required to claim what he believed was rightfully his. The battle for Clara Whitmore was far from over. It was only just beginning. The wedding was set for Thursday. 3 days. That was all the time they had before Thomas Prescott could clear his schedule to perform the ceremony. 3 days of Nathaniel's men patrolling the estate borders. 3 days of Clara looking over her shoulder every time she heard hoofbeats on the drive. 3 days that felt like a lifetime. "You're nervous," Eleanor observed on Tuesday afternoon, watching Clara pace the length of the morning room. "That's perfectly normal. Every bride gets nervous." "I'm not nervous about the wedding." Clara stopped at the window, peering out at the long drive that led to the main road. "I'm nervous about what happens before we get to it. Blackwell won't try anything. He's a judge, for heaven's sake. He has a reputation to maintain. His reputation includes 2 dead wives. I don't think he's terribly concerned about appearances." Eleanor rose and came to stand beside her. "Nathaniel has men watching every approach to the estate. Daniel is practically sleeping in the stables to monitor comings and goings. You're as safe as you can possibly be." "I know." Clara pressed her palm against the cool glass. "I know all of that, but I've learned not to underestimate men like Blackwell. They don't play by rules that apply to the rest of us. Then we'll be ready for whatever he tries." Eleanor squeezed her arm. "In 2 days, you'll be Nathaniel's wife. After that, Blackwell can threaten all he wants. He'll have no legal standing whatsoever." Clara nodded slowly. 2 days. She just had to survive 2 more days. That evening, she and Nathaniel took their customary walk through the grounds, staying close to the house as they'd agreed. His hand held hers firmly, his thumb tracing absent patterns across her knuckles. "You're quiet tonight," he observed. "Just thinking. About how strange life is." Clara looked up at him. "A month ago I was locked in a cellar, certain I was going to drown. Now I'm planning a wedding to a man who—" She stopped, suddenly emotional. "Who what?" "Who sees me. The real me. Not the damaged goods Silas tried to make me believe I was." Nathaniel stopped walking and turned to face her. "You are not damaged goods. You never were." "I know. I'm starting to believe it finally." Clara reached up to touch his face. "Because of you." He kissed her, then soft and sweet, with all the tenderness she'd come to associate with him. When he pulled back, his gray eyes were dark with emotion. "2 more days," he said. "Then you're mine forever." "Forever sounds about right." They walked back to the house as dusk settled over the valley, neither of them aware that they were being watched from the tree line by a man on horseback who had been tracking their movements for hours. Wednesday dawned bright and warm, the kind of perfect summer day that made Clara want to believe everything would be fine. She spent the morning in the library finishing the final section of cataloging she'd been working on for weeks. It felt right somehow to complete this task before becoming the mistress of the house. Mrs. Crane found her there at noon with a lunch tray and an apologetic expression. "Mr. Ashford asked me to tell you he's had to ride out to the north pasture. Some problem with the cattle. He'll be back by supper time." Clara's stomach tightened. "He's leaving the estate." "Just to the north pasture, dear. Daniel went with him. He'll be fine." But Clara couldn't shake the unease that settled over her as she ate her lunch. Nathaniel hadn't left the main grounds since Blackwell's letter arrived. The fact that he'd chosen today of all days felt wrong. She was halfway through her meal when she heard voices in the entrance hall. "I don't care what Mr. Ashford's orders are," a woman's voice said, high-pitched, unfamiliar. "My mistress is ill. She needs Miss Whitmore's help immediately." Clara set down her fork and moved to the doorway. Mrs. Crane stood facing a young woman in a maid's uniform, her expression skeptical. "And who is your mistress exactly?" "Mrs. Helena Crawford. She lives on the old Miller property about 3 miles east. Please, ma'am, she's asking for Miss Whitmore specifically. Says they met at church last Sunday." Clara frowned. She hadn't been to church. She hadn't left the estate at all since her arrival. "I don't know any Mrs. Crawford," she said, stepping into the hall. The maid's eyes widened. "Oh, miss, please, my mistress described you perfectly. Brown hair, green eyes, staying at Ashford Hall. She said you'd understand that you'd come." "This is highly irregular," Mrs. Crane said firmly. "Miss Whitmore doesn't receive calls from strangers, and she certainly doesn't leave the estate unaccompanied." "But she won't be unaccompanied. I have a carriage waiting." "Please, Mrs. Crawford is in terrible pain. She says you're the only one who can help." Something about the maid's desperation seemed genuine. Clara studied her face, looking for signs of deception. The girl appeared genuinely frightened, her hands twisting in her apron. "What kind of pain?" Clara asked. "Female troubles, miss. She won't let the doctor see her, says it's too shameful. But she heard you'd been ill yourself that you might understand." Clara hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. And yet, if there was a woman truly suffering, a woman who might be too ashamed to seek proper help, "I'll go." "Miss Whitmore." Mrs. Crane stepped forward. "Mr. Ashford specifically said." "Mr. Ashford isn't here. And if there's a woman in genuine distress, I can't simply ignore it." Clara turned to the maid. "Give me 5 minutes to get my things." "Clara, please." Mrs. Crane caught her arm. "At least wait until Nathaniel returns. It's 3 miles. I'll be back before supper." Clara covered the housekeeper's hand with her own. "I've spent 2 years being controlled, Mrs. Crane, being told where I could go and when. I need to start making my own decisions again." The older woman's expression softened with understanding, even as worry remained in her eyes. "At least take one of the stable boys with you. I'll have the maid for company. We'll be fine." But they weren't fine. Clara realized something was wrong the moment the carriage turned away from the main road onto a narrow track that led deeper into the woods. The maid's nervous chatter had stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense silence. "This isn't the way to the Miller property," Clara said slowly. "No, miss, it isn't." Clara reached for the carriage door, but it wouldn't budge, locked from the outside. "What is this? What's happening?" The maid wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, miss, I truly am. But he has my brother. Said he'd kill him if I didn't bring you." Who has your brother?" The carriage lurched to a stop. Clara heard voices outside, the shuffle of boots, and then the door swung open to reveal a face she recognized from her nightmares. Judge Horace Blackwell smiled at her with teeth like a wolf's. "Miss Whitmore, how lovely to finally meet you in person." Clara scrambled backward, but there was nowhere to go. Blackwell's men reached into the carriage and dragged her out, their grips bruising on her arms. "Let me go." She kicked, clawed, fought with everything she had. One of the men grunted as her nails found his face. Another cursed as she sank her teeth into his hand. But there were too many of them. A cloth pressed against her face, soaked in something sweet and chemical. Clara held her breath as long as she could, fighting the darkness that crept at the edges of her vision. But eventually, she had to breathe. The world went black. She woke to pain. Her head throbbed. Her wrists burned where rough rope had been tied too tight. She was sitting in a chair, bound at the ankles and wrists, in a room she didn't recognize. Blackwell sat across from her, watching her with the patient attention of a predator waiting for its prey to stop struggling. "Ah, there you are." His voice was cultured, pleasant, completely at odds with the cruelty in his pale eyes. I was beginning to worry I'd given you too much laudanum. Clara's tongue felt thick, her thoughts sluggish. Where am I? An old hunting cabin I acquired some years back. Very private, very secluded. No one will hear you scream. He smiled at her flinch. Not that I expect you to scream. From what Silas told me, you're quite well trained. Silas. Clara's voice came out as a croak. He told you where to find me. For a price? Your brother may have signed away his claim on you, but his debts to me remain. He was quite willing to provide information in exchange for partial forgiveness of those debts. Clara closed her eyes, fighting the wave of betrayal that washed over her. She should have expected this, should have known Silas would find a way to hurt her even after losing. Ashford will come for me. I'm counting on it. Blackwell leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. You see, Miss Whitmore, I've done my research. Nathaniel Ashford is a man of considerable resources and even more considerable principles. He won't let you go without a fight. Then you know you can't win. On the contrary, I've already won. Blackwell's smile widened. In approximately 2 hours, a preacher will arrive to perform our wedding ceremony. Once we're legally married, Ashford will have no grounds to remove you from your husband's care. Clara's blood turned to ice. I won't consent. I'll refuse to say the vows. You'll say them. Blackwell's voice hardened. Because if you don't, I'll have my men ride to Ashford Hall and burn it to the ground, with everyone inside. You wouldn't. I've killed 2 wives, Miss Whitmore. What makes you think I'd hesitate to kill a few servants? He stood, straightening his coat. The preacher will be here at 5 o'clock. I suggest you use the time to come to terms with your new reality. He left the room, and Clara heard a lock turn behind him. She was alone. For a long moment, she simply sat there, letting the terror wash over her. Then slowly, she began to think. The ropes on her wrists were tight, but not impossible. She'd spent years learning to make herself small, to slip free of Silas's restraints when he wasn't watching. If she could work her hands loose. She twisted her wrists, ignoring the burn as the rope abraded her skin. Blood made things slippery. Blood might actually help. It took her nearly an hour, but finally, her left hand slipped free. Clara bit back a sob of relief as she fumbled with the knots binding her right wrist. Her fingers were clumsy, half numb from restricted circulation, but she forced them to work. Free. Both hands free. She bent to untie her ankles, her heart pounding so loud she was certain the guards outside could hear it. When the last knot gave way, she stood on shaky legs and moved to the window. Locked. Of course. The door was her only option. Clara pressed her ear against the wood, listening. 1 guard, maybe 2. She could hear them talking in low voices. She looked around the room for anything she could use as a weapon. A broken chair leg caught her eye, not much, but better than nothing. She picked it up, testing its weight. Then she screamed. Not a scream of fear, but a scream of pain. High-pitched, agonized, the kind of scream that made men come running without thinking. The door burst open, and Clara swung. The chair leg connected with the first guard's temple with a satisfying crack. He went down without a sound. The second guard was faster, reaching for her, but Clara was already moving. She ducked under his arm and ran. The cabin was small, just 3 rooms. Clara found the front door and yanked it open, stumbling out into the late afternoon light. She didn't know where she was. She didn't care. She just ran. Behind her she heard shouting, Blackwell's voice furious. Find her! Find her now! Clara plunged into the woods, branches tearing at her dress rocks, cutting her feet through her thin shoes. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs threatened to give out, until she couldn't run anymore. Then she hid. She found a hollow beneath a fallen tree, barely big enough to squeeze into. She pressed herself against the damp earth, covering her mouth with both hands to muffle her ragged breathing. Footsteps crashed through the underbrush nearby, men's voices calling to each other. Blackwell's men searching. Clara closed her eyes and prayed. The footsteps passed. The voices faded. Silence settled over the woods, broken only by birdsong and the distant rush of water. She didn't move. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Clara's muscles cramped, her cuts stung. But she stayed hidden, waiting until the silence felt safe. When she finally crawled out of her hiding spot, the sun was low on the horizon. She had maybe an hour of daylight left. She needed to find her way back to Ashford Hall. But which direction? Clara looked around, desperately searching for any landmark she might recognize. Nothing. Just trees identical in every direction. Then she heard it. The sound of water. Running water. She followed the sound until she found a creek, its clear water rushing over smooth stones. Water flowed downhill. Downhill meant valley. Valley meant civilization. Clara began to walk. Her shoes fell apart within the first mile. She kept going barefoot, wincing with every step. The cuts on her feet reopened, leaving bloody prints on the stones. She kept going. The sun set. The woods grew dark. Clara stumbled over roots and rocks, guided only by the sound of the water beside her. She was so focused on putting one foot in front of the other that she almost didn't hear the hoofbeats. Clara froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Blackwell. He'd found her. Clara. That voice. That voice was not Blackwell. Clara, where are you? Nathaniel. The name tore from her throat like a prayer. Nathaniel, I'm here. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Then he was there, swinging down from his horse, his arms wrapping around her so tight she could barely breathe. Clara. God, Clara. His voice broke on her name. I thought I'd lost you. I thought... I'm here. She was crying, she realized, sobbing against his chest. I'm here. I'm safe. When Mrs. Crane told me what happened when I realized you'd been taken. He pulled back to look at her, his hands cupping her face. I've never been so scared in my life. How did you find me? Daniel tracked the carriage. When we found it abandoned, we spread out. I've been searching for hours. His thumbs wiped tears from her cheeks. You're hurt. I'm alive. Clara managed a shaky smile. That's what matters. Blackwell. Back at some cabin. I escaped. Hit one of his guards with a chair leg and ran. Despite everything, Nathaniel laughed, a rough, disbelieving sound. Of course you did. Of course you fought your way free. I told you I wasn't going to be helpless anymore. You never were. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. You never were, Clara. More hoofbeats approached. Daniel appeared through the trees, followed by Thomas Prescott and 3 of Nathaniel's men. You found her! Daniel's voice was rough with relief. Thank God. She found herself. Nathaniel lifted Clara onto his horse, then swung up behind her, his arms creating a protective cage around her body. Blackwell is at a cabin somewhere in these woods. Find it. Find him. I want him in chains before sunrise. Consider it done. Daniel wheeled his horse and disappeared into the darkness, the other men following. Thomas Prescott lingered a moment longer. I can still perform the ceremony tomorrow if you're both willing. Clara looked up at Nathaniel. Despite everything, the terror, the pain, the bone-deep exhaustion she felt, a smile tugging at her lips. Tomorrow sounds perfect. The ride back to Ashford Hall passed in a blur. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, safe in Nathaniel's arms, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. She was dimly aware of Mrs. Crane's tearful exclamations when they arrived, of Dr. Hayes's gentle hands, tending to her wounds, of being carried upstairs and tucked into bed, with promises that Nathaniel would be just down the hall. She slept without nightmares for the first time in weeks. When she woke, it was to sunlight streaming through the windows, and Eleanor Prescott sitting beside her bed with a breakfast tray. Good morning, bride. Eleanor's smile was warm, but her eyes showed signs of recent tears. How are you feeling? Like I was dragged through the woods barefoot. Clara struggled to sit up, wincing. Because I was. Dr. Hayes says you'll be fine. Some cuts, some bruises, nothing that won't heal. Eleanor set the tray across Clara's lap. Eat. You'll need your strength. For what? For your wedding, silly. Eleanor's smile widened. It's Thursday. Thomas is already downstairs with Nathaniel, and I've brought a dress that should fit you perfectly. Clara stared at her. We're still getting married today. Unless you've changed your mind. No, I haven't. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I just thought after everything that happened, marrying Nathaniel as quickly as possible seems more important than ever. Eleanor reached out to squeeze her hand. Besides, Blackwell is in custody. Daniel and the men found him at the cabin last night. He's being held at the county jail, awaiting trial for kidnapping, assault, and a host of other charges. The weight that had been pressing on Clara's chest for weeks suddenly lifted. It's over. It's over. Eleanor's voice softened. You're free, Clara. Really and truly free. Clara closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. Free. She'd dreamed of freedom for so long that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to believe in it. Now she didn't have to dream anymore. 2 hours later, Clara descended the main staircase of Ashford Hall in a borrowed dress of ivory silk, her hair pinned up with wildflowers Eleanor had gathered from the garden. Her feet were bandaged. Her wrists still bore rope marks, and she'd never felt more beautiful in her life. Nathaniel waited at the bottom of the stairs, his breath catching visibly when he saw her. Clara. Her name came out as barely more than a whisper. You're a mess. She laughed, self-conscious. I know. Eleanor did her best, but beautiful. He took her hand as she reached the last step. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Flatterer. Truth-teller. He raised her hand to his lips. Are you ready? Clara looked at him. This man who had saved her life, fought for her freedom, loved her despite everything she'd been through. She thought about the journey that had brought her here from the flooded cellar to this moment. I've been ready, she said softly, since the moment you found me. They walked together to the small parlor where Thomas Prescott waited with Eleanor and Mrs. Crane Daniel, and the Prescott servants serving as witnesses. It wasn't the grand wedding Clara might have imagined as a girl before Silas had stripped away her dreams along with everything else. It was better. Thomas spoke the words that would bind them together. Nathaniel's voice was steady as he made his vows, his gray eyes never leaving Clara's face. When it was her turn, Clara found that her voice didn't shake at all. I, Clara Whitmore, take you, Nathaniel Ashford, to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. The words felt like a promise, not just to Nathaniel, but to herself. A promise that the past was behind her, a promise that the future, whatever it held, would be faced together. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Thomas smiled. Nathaniel, you may kiss your bride. Nathaniel's hands cupped her face with infinite tenderness. My wife, he murmured as though testing the words. My husband, Clara replied and kissed him. The small gathering erupted in applause. Eleanor was crying. Mrs. Crane was crying. Even Daniel, standing stoically by the door, appeared to be blinking rather more than necessary. But Clara barely noticed any of it. She was too busy being kissed by the man she loved in the house that had become her home, surrounded by people who had become her family. She was Clara Ashford now. And she was finally completely, irrevocably free. The wedding night was nothing like Clara had feared. She'd spent years dreading intimacy, imagining it as another form of violence, another way for a man to claim ownership over her body. Silas had made sure she understood what awaited her, with Blackwell had described it in crude, terrifying detail, using fear as another weapon in his arsenal. But Nathaniel was not Silas, and he was certainly not Blackwell. We don't have to do anything, he said quietly, standing at a careful distance in the doorway of the master bedroom. Tonight or any night. Whatever you need, Clara. Whatever pace you require. Clara looked at her husband, and felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, not resignation. Something warmer. Something that made her want to close the distance between them rather than maintain it. What if I don't want to wait? Nathaniel's breath caught. Are you certain? I've spent 2 years being afraid of everything. Afraid of touch. Afraid of feeling. Clara crossed the room to stand before him. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Not with you. His hands came up to frame her face, the same gesture he'd used so many times before. But this time, there was no restraint in his eyes. Only love and desire, and a tenderness that made Clara feel precious, rather than fragile. If anything becomes too much, he murmured against her lips. If you need me to stop, I'll tell you. She kissed him, silencing his concerns. I trust you, Nathaniel, completely. What followed was a revelation. Every touch was a question, every response an answer. Nathaniel moved with infinite patience, paying attention to every catch of her breath, every flutter of her pulse. When Clara tensed an instinctive response she couldn't entirely control, he stilled, waited. Let her come back to herself before continuing. And gradually, the tension faded. The ghosts of past terrors retreated to the shadows where they belonged. Clara discovered that intimacy could be gentle, could be joyful, could be a gift shared rather than a power wielded. Afterward, lying tangled together beneath the sheets, she pressed her face against Nathaniel's chest and laughed. What's funny? His voice was drowsy content. Nothing. Everything. Clara propped herself up to look at him. I'm just happy. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Nathaniel's hand came up to stroke her hair. I intend to remind you, every day for the rest of our lives. That's a mighty ambitious promise. I'm a mighty ambitious man. He pulled her back down against his chest. Sleep now, wife. Tomorrow we deal with Blackwell. The trial began 3 days later at the county courthouse in Richmond. Clara had dreaded this moment, knowing she would have to face Blackwell again, would have to recount her kidnapping before a room full of strangers. But Nathaniel never left her side, and Eleanor sat directly behind her, a steadying presence whenever Clara felt her courage waver. Blackwell looked diminished in chains. The cultured, confident predator who had smiled at her in that cabin was gone, replaced by a gray-faced man whose arrogance had finally met its match. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Dr. Hayes testified to Clara's injuries after the kidnapping. The maid who had lured Clara from Ashford Hall broke down on the stand sobbing as she confessed everything. 3 of Blackwell's own men turned against him in exchange for reduced sentences, providing detailed accounts of the judge's plans. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. The court calls Martha Blackwell to the stand. Clara's head snapped up. A woman entered the courtroom, elderly, frail, but with steel in her eyes that spoke of hard-won survival. State your relationship to the defendant. I'm his mother. The woman's voice carried clearly through the silent room. And I'm here to tell you what he did to his wives. What he would have done to this girl if she hadn't escaped. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel for order. Blackwell lunged forward in his chains, his face contorted with rage. You lying old witch! You've no right! I have every right! Martha Blackwell turned to face her son with an expression of cold determination. I watched you destroy 2 innocent women. I stayed silent because I was afraid, because you threatened to have me committed if I spoke. But I won't be silent anymore. She turned back to the jury. My son is a monster. I birthed him. I raised him. And I failed to stop him. But I can stop him now. For the next hour, Martha Blackwell systematically dismantled her son's defenses. She described the accidents that had claimed his first wife pushed down a flight of stairs when she tried to flee. She detailed the illness that had killed his second wife, poison, administered slowly over months. She produced letters, diaries, evidence she had hidden for years, waiting for the moment when speaking the truth might actually make a difference. By the time she finished, several members of the jury were openly weeping. Blackwell had stopped protesting, sitting slumped in his chair with the look of a man who knew he was finished. The verdict came within the hour. Guilty on all counts. The sentence, death by hanging. Clara watched as they led Blackwell away, feeling nothing but a vast, overwhelming relief. It was over. The man who had purchased her like livestock, who had planned to make her his third victim, would never hurt anyone again. Nathaniel's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "How do you feel?" "Free." Clara turned to look at him. "For the first time in my life, I feel completely free." But freedom, Clara discovered, was not an ending. It was a beginning. The weeks that followed the trial brought changes she hadn't anticipated. Her inheritance was finally restored, $3,000 transferred to her name, hers, to use as she saw fit. The money represented independent security, a future that belonged to her, rather than to the men who had tried to control her. "What will you do with it?" Nathaniel asked one evening as they sat together in his study, their study now. Clara had been thinking about that question for days. "I want to help other women. Women like me who have nowhere to run when the people who should protect them become their tormentors. A shelter. Of sorts. A place where they can be safe while they figure out what comes next. A place where someone believes them." Clara looked up at her husband. "I know it won't change the world, but it might change someone's world. That seems worth doing." Nathaniel's expression softened with pride. "Tell me what you need. Money, land, influence, whatever it takes, it's yours. I have my own money now." "You do, but you also have mine, and I can think of no better use for it than what you're proposing." They spent the next hour discussing plans. A cottage on the edge of the estate, renovated to accommodate women in crisis. Staff to provide care and support. Legal resources to help those who wanted to pursue justice against their abusers. By the time they finished, Clara had filled 3 pages with notes. "You're extraordinary," Nathaniel said, watching her with an expression she'd come to recognize as love mixed with wonder. "Do you know that I'm practical? There's a difference." "No. You've been through hell, and your first instinct is to make sure others don't suffer the same way. That's not practicality. That's grace." Clara set down her pen and crossed to where he sat. "You gave me the chance to become this person. Before you found me, I was just trying to survive. You made me believe I could do more than that. You always had this in you. I just provided the space for it to emerge. Don't diminish what you've done." Clara settled onto his lap, her arms wrapping around his neck. "You could have left me in that creek. You could have helped me recover and sent me on my way. Instead, you fought for me, married me, loved me. Loving you was never a choice." Nathaniel's hands settled on her waist. "It was inevitable from the moment I saw you. Even when I was unconscious and covered in bruises. Especially then. You were fighting so hard just to breathe. I knew you were a survivor before you ever opened your eyes." Clara kissed him, then long and deep, trying to communicate everything she couldn't put into words. Gratitude. Devotion. A love so fierce it sometimes frightened her with its intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "I have something to tell you," Clara said softly. "What is it?" She took his hand and placed it against her stomach. "I'm not entirely certain yet. Doctor Hayes says it's too early to know for sure, but I think I might be carrying your child." Nathaniel went completely still. Then slowly, his hand pressed more firmly against her belly, as though he might feel something there if he tried hard enough. "A child," he whispered. "Our child. You're not disappointed. It's so soon, and we haven't even discussed. Disappointed." He pulled back to look at her, and Clara saw that his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Clara," I thought I would never have this. After losing our son, I convinced myself that fatherhood wasn't meant for me, that I wasn't worthy of it. You are worthy. You're the best man I've ever known. And you're the bravest woman I've ever known. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks the tip of her nose. Whatever happens, whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together. You, me, and this child. You're not frightened. Terrified, he admitted, but also happier than I've been in years, perhaps ever. Clara felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. I love you, Nathaniel Ashford. And I love you, Clara Ashford. He kissed her once more, now and forever, until my last breath and beyond. The news of Clara's pregnancy spread through Ashford Hall like wildfire. Mrs. Crane immediately began preparing the nursery. Just in case, mind you, we still don't know for certain. While Eleanor arrived the next day with armloads of baby clothes and an expression of barely contained excitement. I knew it, she declared, sweeping Clara into a hug. The moment I saw you at the wedding, there was something different about you. A glow. That was probably just relief at not being kidnapped again. Nonsense. It was motherhood beginning to bloom. Eleanor held Clara at arm's length, studying her face. How are you feeling? Any sickness? Some. In the mornings mostly. That's perfectly normal. I was sick as a dog with both of mine. Eleanor guided her to a chair with the air of someone who intended to manage this pregnancy, whether Clara wanted her to or not. You must rest more. Eat properly. No more gallivanting about the estate. I wasn't aware I had been gallivanting. You organized an entire charity shelter in the space of 3 weeks. That's gallivanting. Clara laughed despite herself. The shelter had indeed come together faster than she'd anticipated, thanks largely to Nathaniel's resources and Eleanor's social connections. The cottage was nearly ready, staffed by women who understood what it meant to rebuild from nothing. Within the month, they would be prepared to receive their first guests. The shelter won't run itself, Clara pointed out. Someone has to oversee things. Someone does. And that someone can be Mrs. Crane or me or any number of capable women who are not currently growing a baby. Eleanor's expression softened. You've done extraordinary work, Clara, but now it's time to take care of yourself. I'm not good at being idle. Then find something gentle to occupy yourself. Reading, embroidery, writing letters. Eleanor paused. Speaking of letters, have you heard from your brother? The question landed like a stone in still water. Clara hadn't heard from Silas since the trial hadn't wanted to, but she knew from Nathaniel's investigators that he had left Virginia, entirely fled west to escape his creditors and the scandal of his association with Blackwell. Nothing, and I don't expect to. Good riddance. Eleanor's voice held no sympathy. After what he did, helping Blackwell find you. I try not to think about it. Clara looked down at her hands. He was never really my brother, not in any way that mattered, just a man who shared a house with me and decided I was his to use. And now you're free of him forever. Yes. Clara managed a smile. Now I'm free. But freedom, she was learning, was not just about escaping those who had hurt her. It was about building something new in the space they had left behind. The shelter opened on a crisp autumn morning, 2 months after Clara's wedding, and just as her pregnancy was becoming visible enough to require adjustments to her wardrobe. She stood at the gate with Nathaniel beside her, watching as the first residents arrived, 3 women and 2 children, all bearing the marks of lives lived in fear. Mrs. Ashford? The oldest of the women approached hesitantly. Is it true what they say? That someone hurt you too? Clara thought about all the ways she could answer that question. The careful, distant response that would maintain proper boundaries. The vague acknowledgement that would satisfy curiosity without inviting connection. Instead, she took the woman's hands in hers. My stepbrother beat me for 2 years, she said quietly. He locked me in cellars, starved me, tried to sell me to the man who had killed his previous wives. I ran through a storm in my nightgown and nearly died before my husband found me." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "How did you survive?" "One day at a time, one breath at a time, with the help of people who believed me when I thought no one ever would." Clara squeezed her hands. "That's what this place is for, to give you the time and space to find your own way forward, whatever that looks like, however long it takes." "I don't know if I can." "Neither did I, but here I am." Clara stepped back, gesturing toward the cottage. "Come inside. Mrs. Crane has made tea, and there are rooms ready for all of you. You're safe here. I promise." As the women filed past, Nathaniel moved to stand beside his wife. "That was well done," he said softly. "It felt right, telling them the truth. You've come a long way from the woman who couldn't speak of it without trembling." Clara looked up at him. "I had a good teacher." "I taught you nothing. You taught yourself." "You taught me that I was worth saving. Everything else followed from there." Nathaniel's arm wrapped around her shoulders, drawing her close. Together they watched the women disappear into the cottage, watched the children's faces transform from fear to cautious hope. "You know," Clara said thoughtfully, "I used to think my story was a tragedy. Orphaned, abused, nearly killed multiple times. And now I think it's a love story." She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. "Not just about us, though, that's the best part. But about learning to love myself again. Believing I deserved happiness. Finding the courage to reach for it. That's a much better story." "It is. And it's not over yet." She took his hand and placed it on the swell of her belly. "We're just getting started." The baby came in early spring, arriving after a labor that lasted through the night and into the morning. Clara gripped Nathaniel's hand through every contraction, her body remembering pain, but her mind focused on the miracle that was coming. "One more push, Mrs. Ashford," Dr. Hayes urged. "You're almost there." Clara bore down with everything she had, and suddenly the room was filled with a new sound, the thin, strong cry of a newborn infant. "A girl," Dr. Hayes announced, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "A perfect, healthy girl." They placed the baby in Clara's arms, and everything else, the pain, the exhaustion, the fear that had lingered throughout her pregnancy, fell away. She stared down at the tiny face, the dark hair, the gray eyes so like Nathaniel's, and felt her heart expand to accommodate a love she hadn't known was possible. "She's beautiful," Nathaniel breathed, kneeling beside the bed. His hand reached out to touch the baby's cheek with wonder. "Clara, she's perfect." "She is." Clara's voice was thick with emotion. "What should we call her?" They had discussed names for months, going back and forth, unable to settle on anything that felt right. But now, looking at this child who represented everything they had fought for, Clara knew. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope." Nathaniel's eyes glistened. "Hope Ashford. Yes, that's exactly right." The baby yawned her tiny fist, waving in the air, completely unaware that she had just been named for everything her parents had learned to believe in again. 6 months later, Clara stood at the window of the nursery, watching Hope sleep in her cradle. The summer sun streamed through the curtains, casting golden light across her daughter's peaceful face. So much had changed since that terrible night when she'd fled through the storm. So much had healed. Blackwell was dead, executed for his crimes. Silas had vanished somewhere in the Western Territories, too far away to ever threaten her again. The shelter she'd founded had helped 17 women so far, each one finding their way to safety, to healing, to hope. And Clara herself had become someone she barely recognized. A wife, a mother, a woman of influence who used her position to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "You're thinking too loudly again." Nathaniel's voice came from the doorway. "I can hear you all the way from the study." Clara turned, smiling at the sight of her husband. Even after nearly a year of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart skip. Just reflecting. On what? He crossed the room to stand beside her, his arm wrapping around her waist. On how different everything is now. How different I am. You're not different. You're more yourself than you've ever been. Nathaniel pressed a kiss to her temple. The woman I found in that creek was always in there, just buried under years of survival. Now she's free. Because of you. Because of both of us. Because we chose each other. He turned her to face him. I spent 4 years convinced I would never love again. Never feel anything beyond duty and grief. Then you came along and proved me wrong. I spent 2 years convinced I would never escape. Never know safety or happiness. Clara rose on her toes to kiss him softly. Then you came along and proved me wrong. So we saved each other. We did. Hope stirred in her cradle, making the small sounds of a baby waking from sleep. Clara moved to lift her daughter, cradling the warm weight against her chest. You know, she said thoughtfully, I used to dream about running away, finding some place where no one knew my name, where I could start over completely. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else. Clara looked around the nursery at the family she had built, the home she had claimed, the life she had fought so hard to win. This is where I belong, with you, with Hope, building something that matters. Nathaniel moved to embrace them both, his arms wrapping around his wife and daughter. I love you, he said, both of you, more than I have words to express. Then don't use words. Clara smiled up at him. Just keep loving us, every day, for the rest of our lives. That, Nathaniel said, kissing her forehead, is the easiest promise I've ever made. Outside, the summer sun climbed higher, warming the land that had witnessed both their darkest moments and their greatest joys. The storm that had nearly claimed Clara's life was long past, replaced by days of peace and purpose. She had survived. She had healed. She had found love where she least expected it, and built a life more beautiful than anything she had dared to dream. Clara Ashford was no longer a victim of her past. She was the author of her future. And that future, she knew with absolute certainty, was going to be magnificent. Mrs. Crane found them an hour later, still standing together in the nursery, watching Hope sleep. The housekeeper paused in the doorway, her weathered face softening at the sight. Begging your pardon, but there's a young woman at the gate. Says she's been walking for 3 days. Says she heard about the shelter and hopes it's true what they say, that Mrs. Ashford helps women like her. Clara looked at Nathaniel, saw her own understanding reflected in his eyes. Send her in, she said. Give her food and a warm bed. Tell her she's safe now. And you, ma'am? Clara pressed a kiss to Hope's forehead, then handed the baby to her father. I'll be down in a moment. She should hear the words from me. As she walked down the stairs to meet another woman in need, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The cellar, the storm, the creek, the man who had carried her home and given her a reason to live. Every moment of suffering had led to this, not just her own healing, but the chance to help others find their way out of darkness. That was the real miracle. Not surviving, but thriving. Not just escaping, but building something meaningful from the wreckage of what had been. Clara Ashford opened the front door and looked at the frightened young woman standing on her threshold, bruised, exhausted, desperate for someone to believe her. You're safe now, Clara said, reaching out her hand. Come inside. Let me tell you a story about a woman who thought she had nothing left to live for, until she discovered that the worst moments of her life were actually leading her toward the best. The woman took her hand. And somewhere in that simple gesture, that reaching across the distance between despair and hope, Clara felt the full circle of her journey complete itself. She had been saved. Now she would save others. That was her purpose, her calling, her gift to a world that had tried to break her and failed. Clara Whitmore Ashford was no longer running from her past. She was running toward her future, arms wide open, heart full of love, ready for whatever came next. And she was never, ever going to stop.